Thank you. My name is Jim Heckman, and we're looking forward to a very productive conference today. But we want to first of all try to place this in perspective because this is the first meeting of a new center at the University of Chicago. And so I'd like to have two people, in particular, two very prominent people at the University of Chicago speak. So Kai Yi, would you speak first? She is the faculty, she's chair of the faculty committee, which will guide the center. Chicago is a faculty-run university, at least in principle, right? In this particular center, you'll explain the structure of the center and what the plans are. And then Ian Solomon is the vice president for international relations, I guess, right? That's a fair title?
Global engagement.
Global engagement, okay. And they will describe the initiative, and then we'll talk specifically about the agenda today. So that's the plan for the first 20, 25 minutes or so. But we hope that throughout the course of the day there'll be a lot of discussion. It's a round table, a lot of people know each other, and we're really going to form something which I hope will be a very productive series of conferences over the next few years. So.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And as Jim mentioned, that I'm the chair of the Faculty Advisory Committee of the University of Chicago Center in Hong Kong. And on behalf of the center, I really want to welcome everyone here. Now, the University of Chicago Center in Hong Kong is actually the home of the Booth School Asian Executive MBA program, which opens its door in the middle of August. However, the center-wide activities that is involving the university scholarly activity, university-wide scholarly activity is actually just starting now. And you here with the Asian Family in Transition workshop actually marks the start of this university-wide activities. And so we're here to really support the activities of our faculty, staff, and student in three broad areas. The first one being business, economics, and policy. The second one is science, medicine, and health, and the third one being humanities, arts, and culture. So I don't want to take up more of your time, but I just really want to thank you for coming, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion today, and we look forward to many interactions to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Jim. My name is Ian Solomon. I'm the Vice President for Global Engagement for the University of Chicago. And on behalf of our President, Robert Zimmer, and our Provost, Eric Isaacs, I want to welcome you to the first academic event at the University of Chicago Center in Hong Kong. This really is our effort to facilitate and encourage inquiry, intellectual inquiry and impact imbued with global perspectives. So we're glad that you can be part of this event here, which builds upon previous events we've done at the University Center in Beijing. And we have the Beijing Center Faculty Director, Dali Yang, with us today. The university also has a center in Paris, which has been a home for intellectual activity in Europe. We have a center in New Delhi, which we opened a year ago. And these are efforts to bring and engage with top talent and top thinkers from around the world and create opportunities to engage on serious intellectual questions in economics, in the arts, in the sciences. So we hope you will consider this an intellectual destination for yourselves when you're here in Hong Kong. And when you travel around the world, please look to see where the University of Chicago has its faculty and its students asking the tough questions and pursuing truth and trying to advance intellectual discovery. So thank you for being here. I'll be around for a part of the day and welcome any questions that you may have. But I wish you a great conversation and discussion today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just talk very briefly about the initiative and the group at the University of Chicago that's supporting this initiative. As you see from the title, the event is the Asian Family in Transition. And this is a collaborative project that is being conducted with, in cooperation with Junsen Zhang, who will speak after I do. But it's an initiative of the Center for the Economics of Human Development at the University of Chicago, which in turn is part of the broader environment of the Becker-Friedman Institute and the University of Chicago generally. Several of you, I know many of you present in this room today, were present at a very early planning session for this event. I think it was 3 years ago in Beijing, if I recall. I think it was the spring or fall, I guess, of 2012. And At the time when Gary Becker was still alive, Becker and I spoke a lot about trying to think about the Asian family in particular. It's a challenging intellectual agenda. Of course, Gary was famous for his work on the many things, but in particular work on the economics of the family. And the questions, the empirical questions, the intellectual challenges that were faced in trying to understand and fully quantify and go forward in making policy predictions about various Asian economies, various developments, fascinated us both. And the plan was to launch a series which would have annual meetings which would discuss these events. And so I think all of you have a card or something like this card in front of you. So let me just review some of the themes that we sound. And one of the purposes of this conference today is actually to lay out an agenda. So there's nothing set in stone, but what we're really doing is essentially trying to understand how the family has changed. We know there are dramatic changes in Asia, and we know we're going to hear a lot about that today by world leaders who've done basic research on these questions. And so the goal is to try to develop not just specific knowledge about each of these topics, but also to have a clear plan about going forward. And the plans forward would be to have meetings both at the University of Chicago, also at the Beijing Center. Dali Yang is here. He'll be on the program talking as well, but he's helped facilitate this. And of course, the earlier meeting was at the Beijing Center when we talked about this in a very preliminary way. And we even had some papers. Some very distinguished economists were present there and are present here from that meeting. So the plan then is to study Asia. And Asia is defined broadly, although for the purpose of this meeting today, we're focusing mostly on East Asia. I mean, the hope would be to also bring in some parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia and South Asia in particular, but they're not very well represented here at this conference. So this is something we might think about going forward. And I must say it partly represents my own ignorance of the field in that particular part of the demography and economic transitions in South Asia and Southeast Asia. But I think the agenda here is sufficiently broad. So if you look at what the topics are, and here it's just kind of almost a do list, but if you look at the topics that will be studied by the initiative, we know that fertility transition has been dramatic in many Asian countries, but it hasn't been uniform. And there's a lot of debate. I mean, even about the very narrow question about whether or not the one-child policy in the mainland China has been the principal driver of the reduction in fertility. I mean, that's a question that we'll talk about more today, and is certainly a topic that many of us have thought about. But just generally the question about declining fertility patterns in most countries in East Asia, that seems to be a consequence of development. Just exactly what are the forces, how important are things like education, other opportunities for women, and other factors that have been considered very creatively by people who are here at the round table, land reform and so forth. And then there's a related question about son preference, the whole question of how these son preferences changed. And that takes us directly into the question of marriage and divorce. Again, the traditional family, what we think of as the traditional Confucian family in East Asia, seems to be changing. And it's changing at different rates in different countries. And the question is, how are the marriage markets, the way that individuals match and sort, and the scarcity of women relative to men, how do these interact in creating changes in what formerly were thought to be exogenous traits, immutable traits about son preference and about how what structure should be of marriage and what the role of women should be. So the issue of marriage and divorce is, of course, closely related to the issue of fertility and son preference, but then also the more recent phenomenon of migration. We know that in areas where there has been an very explicit use of son preference and changing demographic structure favoring the birth of boys over girls, there's been a real shortage of women, and with it, a demand then for wives, and with it then migration. And that creates another whole set of issues, which involves cultural integration and the acceptance of cultural integration across different across different countries. Another related issue, and these are all related topics, and that's why the economics of the family is so important, is the question about family investments in children. And exactly what do we know about child quality? We know that many countries now, as a result of fertility decline, are actually going to be facing declining productive workforces in the near future. I mean, even mainland China will be suffering a peak and then a decline in terms of productive labor. And so the question then is, how can the countries around Asia compensate for this? One is through migration. A second is through investment in skills, by having children that are more productive, by basically changing the nature of the investment, both in formal schooling and in family relationships. But then there's a larger set of issues that come out that stand on their own, which was how have the practices of parenting, child development, and traditional values, how they're intertwined, and how preferences are formed. And then, of course, as we'll hear, the issue of the left behind children in rural China, which is dramatic, a very important, large-scale question. So there's a whole set of theoretical questions about the economics of the family, how child preferences are being formed, how, as the welfare state is introduced into East Asia, the incentives are changing, even for the traditional Chinese family, and how that's changing. How much about the growth of out-of-wedlock births and the changing relationships between men and women and generations. And with it, of course, the treatment of siblings, the aging issue I spoke about already. But then there's this other larger issue, is what about the next generation? I think that's a huge question. And we are going to hear about this, and I think it's important. And again, these issues are linked, and it's important that here in this room anyway, we understand that they're linked. It's not just the study of intergenerational mobility, but understanding how family connections, the asset market, relationship to the asset market, borrowing markets, how education is financed, how the returns to education are affecting the nature of the family. It's this kind of interrelationship, what you might call a general equilibrium type of relationship, which is going to play a very important role and in our discussions. And I think it will play a role, I think, in shaping, defining the agenda. But we're also curious about how important are the early years relative to the later years, and what form of schooling are most efficient. And this takes us into issues that immediately concern the family, but also concern schooling, the structure of schooling. Do we really want to have, for example, a formal schooling system as we have now in many Asian countries, or do we have schooling systems that are more adapted, say, to the technology and maybe some intermediate levels of schooling which would adapt the high-level technology to essentially the realities of the existing workplaces, so that so there can be some flexibility in adapting given technology. So that's another set of issues. And then finally, there's a so closely related question. It's different, but it's still closely related. And that is, we also have another study group, if you will. We've seen studies by comparing, like Cyrus Chu's study, looking, for example, at the comparison of families on the mainland from the same ethnic Chinese background to families in Taiwan, really understanding how social and economic factors are changing the nature of family relationships. We also have another relationship to study, and that is how Asian American families have evolved and how exactly Asian American families differ from other ethnic groups in the U.S., and how much the sort of traditional values that have been shaped in East Asia have been successful in promoting what I think is a very strong success of East Asians in American society. So these are broad and interrelated topics. I don't want to go on any great depth in any one of these topics, but I do want to encourage one thing at this conference, which is a tradition. I'm going to be sitting up here. I guess I'm nominally the chair all day. I would say that it would be very useful if we could open up and have a lot of broad questions back and forth. So instead of just giving straight lectures, this really is a seminar in the best tradition, I hope, at the University of Chicago. And that would mean then people should feel free to ask questions, intervene, scream. I'll be up here if it gets out of hand completely, but it would be good, though, because at the end of the day today, literally at the end of this day today, instead of the usual rhetorical end of the day, we do want to come up with an agenda for what's next and how we might proceed. and we can proceed in multiple venues and on multiple topics. And so this, in some sense, plays a very important role in shaping the future of this whole series of the Asian family in transition. Where are the good research topics? Where do we have good data? What seem to be good research opportunities? And then to think about maybe even specialized conferences, for sure specialized conferences, focusing on particular aspects of this, but all within the broader theme of trying to really understand the Asian. So we do want to have this running toll, keeping track of how the Asian family is evolving and how this particular slice, maybe the impact of the welfare state on marriage and divorce and the traditional Confucian values of children that might hold towards parents. But we still want to think more broadly about the questions of fertility, education, the role of women, and the whole evolution. So it's a very exciting area to study, and I look forward to this day. And so Junsen, my co-organizer, will give some remarks now, and then we'll start.
So as Jim said, we hope very much under Jim's leadership, this event will continue from now on an annual basis, if not more frequent. So I'm going to give a very brief go-through of some facts on China, on the family. Very brief and very quick, just some, and some of you may go into very depths later on. Okay, so just a very brief look. So looking at the crude divorce rate, as we can see here, China is rising, the divorce rate. Okay, so now is a little bit above Korea, but not as high as US yet. Okay, so US is somewhere over here. Age-specific divorce rate, so it's also rising, of course, as we all know. Okay, so of this. Of course, urban, we don't do it here, urban and rural, but the younger one, this cohort, right, as you can see, is highest among all the others. Married proportion, okay, quite stable, not too much fluctuation, okay, around 70%. Average age at first marriage, there has been some fluctuation. This is by urban male, female. Again, it fluctuates a little bit. Okay, around old days, 19 or 20 years old for the rural people, rural female. But now urban male is around 22, fluctuate, and 23. Cohabitation before marriage has been rising up dramatically, as we all know. Okay, so it used to be almost zero, but now is 35% or 37%. Okay, and by rural, urban, male, female, and so on. Duration of first marriage before divorce has gone down significantly. Used to be for this earlier birth cohort, 1940s is a very long, 12, 14, or 15 years. But now is, maybe what we call the fast marriage, fast divorce, right? So I don't know what is the exact wording in English. In Chinese, it's a very vivid illustration. It's just you're married within a few days or a few weeks, and then maybe after a few weeks you get divorced.
A lot of these numbers are heavily censored, right? Because young people have not gotten
Yeah, of course, yeah. This is just by birth cohort, yeah. Yeah, those are just some very crude facts, right? And without too much interpretation, perhaps. But that's the thing some of you may want to get into. But here I just want to show you some pictures. Okay, so marriage market, online dating is becoming more popular. Okay, so there are many very popular dating clubs. Okay, and this is one of them. Okay, and so the membership, going up a lot. Okay, in recent years.
对，我也不知道它的
fertility, maybe this is something Jim has been interested in. So fertility, as you see from this diagram, this, I guess, is a famine period over here. Okay, then after the famine, it rose up significantly. And then going down, right? And one-child policy is 1980 is here. Before 1980, fertility had gone down significantly. So there was economic development, but there are also family planning policy in place, not one-child policy, but which encouraged spacing, birth spacing, later marriage, and so on, which was in place during this period. So fertility actually reduced more significantly during this earlier 1970s than after 1979 or 1980, fertility going down, less dramatically compared to the earlier period. Sex ratio has been rising, and some of the people here has been the leader in this group. So sex ratio going up significantly. Okay, so the boy over girls, okay, now is 118. Okay, used to be 108. Okay. Rising sex ratio among first births in China, fraction male. So in the one-child policy zone, okay, which is urban and so on, okay, so the sex ratio went up significantly from 1990, okay, a lot, okay. And in the rest of China, where one-child policy is not so strict, say in the rural area, the sex ratio is not so much deviating from the normal ratio. If we look at the sex ratio by birth parity, so the first birth, of course, it's normal, right? Because most of rural population is still 70 or 80% of China. So where there is no one-child policy, so the first birth is okay. But second birth is very much distorted. And third birth, of course, is even more distorted. And the distortion is rising, perhaps with increasing availability of the ultrasound and other sex selection techniques. Recent relaxed one-child policy, as you know, in the end of 2000, most of the provinces in China implement the policy that allows a second child if both of the couple are single. Okay, so that was in 2000, and the policy was implemented in different provinces at different timing. Okay, so by the end of 2002, 2003, almost all the provinces have this policy. Then the further relaxed policy, as you know, that allows a second child if one of the couple is single, singleton. And this policy was passed in 2013. Okay, this is all in urban. Of course, in rural, it has been always, second child is okay, especially if the first one is a female. But this new policy is all about urban. So if the couple, if they are both one-child persons, then they can have a second child of the next generation. Or this newer policy, then as long as one of the member is one child, then the couple can have a second child. Okay? Now, of course, it's too early to evaluate the impact of this policy, right? But just by looking at some raw data, the data from National Health and Family Planning Commission, okay, they say there are 11 million couples who are eligible for have a second child. Okay, 11 million couples. Up to May 31st, last year, there are only 271,000 couples who apply for the permission of having a second child. Okay, about 2.5%, okay, of those eligible who actually want a second child. And by the end of 2014, they're about 9.7%. So around 10% Of course, some of them may decide to have a second child later, but that is, indication that people are not rushing to have a second child in urban China, even though the policy now allows them to do so. But so we will need to wait for a few years to see the effect. So family structure change, along with the pattern we have seen, the average family size has gone down, right? So total is like this. Rural, of course, is still high, but urban is lower. But overall, they are all in decline, the family size. And generation, how many generations do they live together? Okay, so this curve is 2 generations. Is of course is a most common one, but it's still in decline. Okay, so that means the parents and the children living together, 2 generations. Okay, so the one who are going up a lot is what's this? Is a one generation. That means just the couple themselves without children. Okay, so there are some subtle changes over here, but basically it's becoming more and more nuclear families. Human capital investment, as we know, in China has invested a lot in education and so on. So as we can see from here, by birth cohort, okay, so the average years of schooling has gone up a lot. Okay, so it's almost straight line. Okay, so that's just my very brief account of some of the facts, and some of you may touch on different angle and so on. This is just very simple statistics. Okay, no research yet on my side on those issues.
How would you modify these figures for other parts of East Asia? Computer, right? Korea. You're going to talk about that. Okay, one slide. Yeah. Because there are similar trends, but we started earlier. The question is whether we can learn much from this sort of inter-country comparison.
Right, right. So mine only one slide with the U.S. and Korea. Yeah. There is a slide about Japan, which I deleted because then it will go too much digression.
I mean, the rise of human capital, you see investment, right, is going very fast, but it's really recent. And so if you look at the share of the labor force, the entire labor force from 16 to 64, that's in high school, that's had 1 year of high school, it's only 24%. It's only, including the recent rise, 24%. That's almost the lowest country in the world of all upper middle, lower middle income countries. China is severely underinvested in education. It's lower than South Africa. It's lower than Indonesia. So China has lower human capital. This is and this from census data. So if you look at the census data and people say, have you been to high school? It's only 24% of people have been to high school. What cohort? That's all cohorts. Recent cohorts, it's 51%. So the 2010 cohort, which is the most recent one we have from the census, is 50%. But that's going to take a long time to work its way through the labor force. And China's not increasing any more than Mexico or Chile or Colombia. So the amount of underinvestment in the past is really going to be a huge anchor.
Okay. Yeah. So.
There's nothing you can do.
Just quick remarks.
Just quick remarks.
Clash of swords.
China's education development has been uneven. So even though there's a large percentage of youth who finish high school, but the proportion in a given cohort who go on to have college education is very high. Right now, the newer cohort who are in college, about 20, I estimate, about a quarter of them would have finished college. That's a percentage of U.S. So China has reached parity with U.S. in terms of college degree attainment. I know. I will take I'm looking at cohort.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but if you look at over project into 50 years from now, higher percentage of Chinese would have had a college education than the U.S. If you look at 50 years from now.
Okay.
And then presumably there'll be a discussion later on today about which is in the relevant. No, about the oversupply question though.